Mazama. And at this time, we are waiting for Professor Bayyinah Bello and Dr. Ọbádélé Kambon to join us. They may be having some internet connectivity issues at the moment. But thank you for joining us, everyone. We will open up this discussion with libation and an opening prayer, and then we can get into our discussion today. So I'm going to ask Shinudi, the president of our chapter, Afrocentricity International, Philadelphia, to lead us with the libation and prayer. So Shinudi, if we can get permission from the eldest of this group, and then we can get started.
Yes, permission, my permission.
Shinudi?
Yes. So I want to call upon the ancestors to come among us for this meeting. I'm going to first call upon our personal ancestors. I'm going to call upon my grandmother Mbu and my grandfather Redombina, and I'm going to ask you to do the same in heart. Ashe?
Ashe.
Ashe.
Also going to call the spirit of the freedom fighter, those who, with their blood, they paved the way for us to be here. Those who fought for our freedom, who fought for us. I'm going to call upon the name of Malcolm X, Shaba Sankara,
Ashe.
Ashe.
Mayanda,
Ashe.
Ashe. Ashe.
and Louverture.
Ashe.
Ashe.
And if the audience want to say maybe a few names.
Marcus Mosiah Garvey.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Hallelujah.
Ashe. Gregory Tucker, Ernest Spencer.
Ashe.
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 Thomas Sankara.
Ashe.
Ashe.
Mukhtar Arua.
Ashe.
Malcolm X.
Ashe.
Dora Sab,
Ashe.
Ashe.
Queen Nzinga,
Ashe.
Ashe.
Also to the unknown, Ashe.
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 Ashe. Ashe. So I ask the ancestor to lead us during this meeting so that we can have a proper discussion, so that we can have clarity of thought as we're speaking, and that we come with the proper solutions and idea so that we can liberate our people. Ashe.
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 All
Ashe.
right, back to you, Waida.
Okay. Now we're going to go over into introductions. So I would like to introduce myself. I'm Sister Wahida Ama. I will be moderating this discussion. I am the Media and Information Coordinator for our Philadelphia chapter. And the co-host today, Brother Tristan, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Wait, I'm unmuted now?
Yes.
Everyone can hear me? Okay, because I was having some technical issues. So, what's up, everybody? So, I'm Tristan Samuels. I'm the General Secretary for AI Philly, and I will be co-hosting with Sister Wahida.
Okay, and I would like to introduce, I just received here that I believe Dr. Ọbádélé will be joining us momentarily. So I'd like to-
He's in.
Okay, okay. Excellent. Hotep, Dr. Ọbádélé. So I'm going to introduce the panel today. We have first up Dr. Mazama. She is the Associate Professor and Director of Graduate Programs at the Department of Africology at Temple University, Managing Editor of the Journal of Black Studies. She has a laundry list of books that she's co-wrote and written herself, including the Encyclopedia of Black Studies and the Encyclopedia of African Religion, which earned praise for pioneering her work from the National Council of Black Studies. She is an ordained Mambo Voodoo, author, mother, and is the Parat, or the head of our international organization, Afrocentricity International. Dr. Mazama, would you like to just share what you might have going on today and what, in any projects that you're working on?
Well, thank you very much for this introduction. I just want to say that I did get a promotion on the plantation, and I'm full professor of Africology and African American Studies. What I've been working on is the third volume of the African Foundation's book that we've published. It's a workbook for children, it's an Afrocentric workbook of biographies. I'm also started working on an encyclopedia of European crimes against African people. And basically helping the organization grow and spread, throughout the world. We are now present in about 27 different countries. And so that's pretty much what I've been doing lately. Thank you for organizing this forum and thank you for inviting me. I look forward to the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to go to the next panelist, none other than Dr. Molefi Kete Asante. He is the chair of the Department of Africology at Temple University, created the first PhD program in African American Studies. He also co-edited the Encyclopedia of Black Studies and Encyclopedia of African Religion with Dr. Mazama. He's the founder of the Molefi Kete Asante Institute for Afrocentric Studies and the co-founder of Afrocentricity International. He is lauded as one of the, if not the most published Black author in the United States. His father, professor, director, editor, Dr. Asante. You have anything that you're working on right now that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yes, I would just like to say, first of all, that I'm very thankful and very happy to be on this panel with these distinguished participants. And also, I am very pleased that AI Philadelphia is having this program. I am actually working on a book right now, which is called The African Jele's Gift of Spirit, which is, I've been working on it most of the day today, which is my contribution, hopefully, to the whole question of spirituality in the African world. So that's the thing that I'm working on most, but I have a book coming out on the Parat, Mazama, which is now in production with Lexington Publishers. And I have a book called Afrocentric Pan-Africanist Vision, which is also coming out this summer. Which is a book that deals with the question of George Padmore's influence on directing Pan-Africanism toward the socialist movement rather than toward an Afrocentric movement. Then I have a book that's now in production, which is called Privilege and Communication, which will be out in a couple of months. So I'm trying to keep busy during this COVID period. But I'm delighted to be on this program, and I know I will listen and learn a lot that will also be very helpful. And I appreciate you guys for what you're doing. Thanks. Hotel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Asante, and we thank you for being with us as well. Next up, we did have on the panel Professor Bayyinah Bello. Now, I'm not sure if was she able to join the conversation yet.
She's not on yet. She may be having difficulties, with the Wi-Fi out in Haiti. But if she joins, I'll let you know that she's joined.
Okay, please do so. Thank you. So for Professor Bello, I know she's not with us, but I did have this in case if she does join us. She is the founder of the organization for historical research called Fondation Marie-Claire Heureuse Félicité Bonheur de Céline. For short, that's Fondation Félicité. She's a Haitian historian, author, mother, professor, lecturer, publicist, and social and humanitarian worker. She's also the founder of the Citadel International School, and also does a lot of lectures on spiritual topics and spiritual work. So we are delighted, hopefully, if we can have her join us as well. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Ọbádélé Kambon. He's the founder of abibitumi.com and the Abibitumi Communiversity. He's a senior research fellow and head of the language, literature, and drama section of the Institute of African Studies at the University of Ghana. He's the editor-in-chief of the Ghana Journal of Linguistics, as well as secretary of the African Studies Association of Africa. He is a father and teacher. He's also helped 34 Africans of the diaspora to receive Ghanaian citizenship in 2016 and also will be helping another 126, or I'm sorry, has also assisted 126 to receive citizenship in 2019. He does assist others in repatriation efforts via repatriateghana.com. Dr. Kambon, do you have anything that you'd like to add, or anything that you're currently working on?
Very good. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Again, a very distinguished panel to be a part of. Right now, I'm working on, I actually have an article that is a prelude to a book, and it's called The Ancient Kemetu Origins of Pan-Africanism. And it's looking at Black people coming together on the basis of being Black in Kemet. Oftentimes we kind of gloss over that name like just a label, but the fact that we refer to our land as a land of Black people is actually evidence of us coming together on the basis of being Black people. You know, several other things I review right now, but all of that can, the things that are contained therein can come up as part of the discussion. So I definitely appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to the panel today.
Asante Sana, thank you so much. And I did want to just add that, of course, the panel that I've described, this is just a small number of the myriad of things that they're involved in, and a lot of the work they've done. So thank you again for all of you for joining us today. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the Q&A portion of this discussion. First of all, let's open up by asking what is meant by the word Renaissance when discussing an African Renaissance? And this question is open to anyone on the panel. Feel free to follow up on anyone else's answers as well.
Well, if I may, I believe that the word Renaissance is of French origin, and it really means rebirth, right? So it means that we're being born again. And so the idea is that Africa somehow needs to be reborn or reborn to itself. This is my understanding of African Renaissance.
And how does this relate to liberation, freedom, and revolution?
I mean, you're directing it to me or anyone?
This is to anyone on the panel. We know that when we think of the word Renaissance meaning rebirth, we do know that and understand that. How does it relate to the rebirth of us as African people?
Well, I guess if we ask ourselves, how did we get in that position that we need to be reborn, then we will understand how it relates, how Renaissance, relates to liberation. Obviously, we've been suppressed in major ways, through colonization, neo-colonization, enslavement, and so on and so forth. And now we need to become ourselves again. We need to be again African people. But I want to defer to my colleagues. I don't want to monopolize.
No, if I may, I agree with Parat Mazama on this question. But I just want to add a couple of things. One is that all societies, I believe, after a period of time, die or they are degenerate. And in order for them to continue, they have to say that they are being reborn, or they're sent to the trash heap of history. I think now I'm just thinking back of people and places that I heard of when I was younger, like the Hittites. The Hittites are gone. Does that mean that the Hittites did not have a Renaissance? That they had a period where they flared up and they were significant, and then they're gone. The Moguls are gone, or they are normally incorporated into other societies and structures. And I think that as Parat Mazama mentioned about the word Renaissance in the French context, that it's normally applied to the movement, probably from the feudal age, from feudalism to modernity, by the Europeans. And that they were the ones who said, well, you know, we are now going through some Renaissance, and they began to go through that period of transition. And I think all Renaissances, even, and it's sometimes very difficult to use that word in relationship to Africa, but we have to right now. But all Renaissances are based on models of the past. In other words, if you don't have a model, then you cannot be reborn, because the idea of being having a rebirth is that you were born before. If you were not born before, then you can't have a rebirth. So in this sense, the Renaissance of Europe, for example, found its basis for rebirth in the Greek model. They looked to the Greeks, who were more ancient than they were, more than 1,000 years earlier. And they looked to those Greeks and said, can you show us, can you give us an example? And that's why when you go to Europe and you go to Berlin, you see all of the buildings that are built like ancient Greek temples. And you go to Paris and you go to London, you see these, what they consider to be Greek. But of course, we know that there's something older than the Greek model. But the notion of Renaissance, I think, has a lot to do with societies being reborn, or somehow, if they're not reborn, they then end up in the trash heap of history. But I think that in terms of liberation, that for us, the reason Renaissance is important, and the reason that Sheikh Anta Diop asked the question in the 1940s, when will we speak of an African Renaissance? Because he was really concerned with the fact that we are in a position of a degenerate African culture. And everywhere you look, you can see it. And this is why, in terms of African nations, African states, African leadership, African values, a sense of African vigor, a sense of African appreciation of our ancestors and the reverence for nature, or an understanding of sacrifice and relationships. I think that there is a time and there is a need for an African Renaissance. And I think that's where our liberation comes from. I mean, that's a part of it, because to be liberated means that you have to at least understand that you are in a position of not being liberated. You are in a position of bondage. You are in a position of unfreedom. You are in a position of degeneracy. So how do you get out of that? And let me stop here, because there's much more to say.
Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tristan, do you want to go ahead with the next question?
I think Dr. Ọbádélé was speaking, but you have to unmute, brother.
Yeah, can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah, if I can also just briefly touch on this, that when we look at the word Renaissance, the re is the again, and then naissance is referring to birth. And what this is basically a calque, a direct translation of Wahim Mesut. So this is a concept, and it's actually the name of Nesu Biti Amenemhat, which the name translates to Amen in the front. So the Heru name of Nesu Biti Amenemhat is Wahim Mesut, one who has repeated births. And one reason why I really like the work of, well, everybody, but per Ama Mazama, she talks about the significance of names. That if you just look at the names of the rulers of Kemet, for example, each name, it tells you something about what they intend to do in terms of their internal policy, also what they intend to do in terms of their foreign policy, because sometimes you'll have a name like the one who's trampled on the Amu, right, these Eurasians. So that's a foreign policy. But when we look at Wahim Mesut, you find this as the Heru name of Nesu Biti Amenemhat, and this lets you know that what he plans on doing is bringing about a resurrection, a rebirth, a renaissance. Now, this is before there's anything called a French language on the entire planet. So, you know, we're talking about, you know, roughly around 1991 BCE. So this is something that we have to look at, is that when we are looking at terms, we have to look at where these terms come from. And we also have to rectify terms. That if you have someone who thinks that, let's say a small child who is told that, oh, that thing is not a snake, it's a rope, that the very fact that they have incorrect terminology means that they're gonna try to go pick up that snake and use it to tie up, a bundle of wood. And guess what? That child is most likely gonna get bitten. Also, this was another name that is a period for another ruler, also known as Ramesu, Kanak Meri Ramesu, also known to the Eurasians as Ramesses the 11th, that from around the year 10, this is referred to as the Wahem Mesud era. Also, this is one thing that has to do with, this isn't just the name that I'm referring to myself as an indication of my policy. This is what this era, in which I'm ruling is referred to. So I think that what it behooves us, and I'll wrap up very quickly, it behooves us to actually look at the source of these terms. Otherwise, we'll try to fit square pegs into round holes and vice versa, trying to take Eurasian terms in French, and apply them to us when those terms existed before there were any French people on the planet Earth.
So are you suggesting we should come up with an African term? Maybe that would be more appropriate.
Absolutely, I think we should use the African term of Wahem Mesud. And this is something that our great ancestor, Nana Jacob Carruthers, also known as, he was one of the founders of ASCAC. And he dealt with this exact same term, Wahem Mesud. And Baba Jedi Shemsu Jehuti, which was his name out of Kemet, he would always talk about this idea of Wahem Mesud. Imagine how liberating it would be if we started using, terms such as these instead of using terms like Renaissance. Imagine if we had our correct spatial orientation in terms of the South Up map as the first map in the history of the world, now called the Turin Papyrus map, which should be called the Imahu Amenakt map, because that was the scribe who made it. It's a South Up map. So basically what we're dealing with is that we're upside down, inside out, and backwards because we're using these Eurasian terms as opposed to going back to the source. So we return to the source, just like in the story of Sanhat, where he's told to come back to the land of the Black people. He comes back and he gets his just rewards for doing so. I think that this is really the Sankofa that we're looking for.
Brother Tristan?
I hold. Wait, so everyone can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
It's a bit. He was acting kind of funny. Okay, good. So for the next question, so we sort of deconstructed Renaissance and its limitations as a concept, and we got right into language right away. So I want to ask for the panelists, what is to discuss the importance of African languages in bringing about Wahem Mesud?
Anybody? Whoever grabs the microphone first. I'm trying to defer to my elders, even though I really like the language question, but I would like to defer to my elders and let them perhaps tackle it first.
So we know that's your area.
Okay.
Okay. Can you speak up louder, Dr. Mazama?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So African languages are crucial to everything. That this is reality versus lack thereof. This is Ma'at versus Isfet. If you look at any Eurasian term, whether it is God, whether it is devil, whether it is Cupid or leprechauns, like any of that is just manifestations of Isfet, right? It's fundamental alienation. And when we apply these anti-African terms to reality, it really, it's the reason why I always say that the equal sign will kill our people when it's used inappropriately. When we put an equal sign between God and Auradin Yonkupon, you understand, when we put an equal sign between, devil and Eshu, that these are not correct. Not only are they a different way of looking at the world, they are the incorrect way, they are the wrong way.
They are the anti-life, anti-everything. So our languages are founded in what's referred to as fundamental interrelation, whereas Eurasian languages are founded on fundamental alienation. So language is really the foundation of everything that we plan on doing. When you have people who, as a matter of fact, I have an article out for review now about people who are saying, well, Ma'at means this Eurasian term or that Eurasian term. I actually had to do a table that says Ma'at is not equal to any of these terms. It doesn't mean egalitarianism. It doesn't mean objectivity. It doesn't mean liberalism. It doesn't mean this. No, no, no. If you want to understand what Ma'at is, go actually to the source itself and read in the language and then understand the context in which it is used. You can read something like the prophecy of Imahu Neferti to understand what Ma'at is. So the language piece is core to everything. If we leave that behind, or if we think that that is just superfluous, then we are defeated before we even got started, because that is everything about who we are. And that's the only thing that's going to bring about the Wahim Mesut that we're talking about. If we're just perpetuating these Eurasian concepts, these Eurasian terms, then we will continue to be alienated from reality. And ultimately that's a losing battle. So for the Wahim Mesut to take place, as I'm sure many of you on the call know, that African languages have to be a part of that. In my own household, I've never spoken to my children. I have 3 children and 1 on the way. I've never spoken to them in any Eurasian language, not a word, ever since they were born up to now, right? And recently someone says, well, how can you do that? How can you do that? And I said, Itamar Ben Avi. They're like, what? Itamar Ben Avi. This is the reason why Hebrew is a spoken language. This is the first native speaker of modern Hebrew whose father shut him up into a house somewhere. Now, we're not doing anything close to that, which lets us know that we're really not serious like that. But his father locked him up and wouldn't even let his mother speak to him in anything other than Hebrew. He was only spoken to in Hebrew his entire childhood. And because of that, now you have, this terrorist criminal state called Israel, where guess what? They're speaking Hebrew and writing Hebrew and boom, 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 boom. So if we plan on doing anything, it's like this. So my children, they do their exercises in Chi, in Yoruba, and then in Medu-Necha. And my oldest daughter is doing translations. She's finished the translation of the instructions of Imahu Patahotep into Chi. She's done with that. She's about to get started with the translation into Yoruba. She's working on that now. She got her dictionary, all the materials that she needs. She's doing it unsupervised. When she gets done, then I'll look at it, edit it, make sure that everything is on point, and we'll publish that, Bureau of Ghana Languages, right? So this is just to say it's not just talk. It's not enough for us to come together and speak English and say, yeah, we need to use African languages. It's all about what are we doing in our own households. So whether that's Ebonics, Haitian Creole, whatever it is, we better be doing this if we plan on ever reconnecting with ourselves and bringing about victory. This is it.
Okay, can I say just a few words about this? Because hello?
Yes.
Yeah, if I may, because I agree to a large extent. I think it's profoundly important that we see language, particularly as the basis for resurrecting, in a sense, or revisiting our memory. I think that that's important. This has always been important when you start talking about any kind of Renaissance. And if we use the word Wahim Mesut, which is a good word and a solid word, we understand a lot of things. We understand that there were at least 3 or 4 Wahim Mesuts before the Greeks even had one. And we know that we had these periods. But here's another aspect to this, and I'm going to use, if I can, a Eurasian model for a demonstration. And then I'll maybe use also the Hebrew model. Latin died. It died, basically. And yet Latin found, in a sense, its revival, not as Latin, but in elements in French, Russian, Spanish, Portuguese, and even in English. So, so the implications for us when we start looking at Chicam is to raise the question, how can we in our own contemporary African languages, as well as in the European languages that many of our people live in, how can we find inspiration just as people have always looked back to the ancient language and then revived themselves through that memory without necessarily following the same prescriptions as those ancient societies. Let me give another example, because I appreciate brother, do you pronounce your name Ọbádélé or Ọbádélé? Brother Kambon.
Muted.
Yes, yeah. I'm
Yeah,
trying to, I have children running around, so I'm trying to keep the
That's all right.
noise
No,
down.
no, I just asked you a question.
Right, Ọbádélé, all three
okay.
high tones.
Ọbádélé, that's okay. All right. So here's the thing, brother Ọbádélé. The thing that I'm thinking about, because you mentioned it, and I think it's very good, that with the Hebrew, the interesting thing with Hebrew is because Hebrew also was considered essentially a dead language. And what the Europeans spoke, who considered themselves Jews, they spoke Yiddish, particularly in Germany and other places. And then it had fallen into a category that they had lost it. But when they start thinking about the revival, the political revival of Israel, they had to go back, revive Hebrew, and bring it into the modern era. And so now people speak Hebrew, but they didn't speak Hebrew in 1900. They spoke, they found it that way. And I say this because a few months ago, I was in Russia, right? And the interesting thing in Russia is because it wasn't clear to me that how Russian, and because of Pushkin, took the Russian language, found a lot of its sources in Latin, recreated the peasant language, and made it the national language of Russia. There are big statues of Pushkin around Moscow. So what did he do? I mean, the word like Tsar, the Tsar, is really the word Caesar. Comes right out of the Latin. But what they did, they said, we find our memory in the ancient terminology. And I think that with us, and Brother Ọbádélé is correct on this, that we can find in Wehimesu the notion of rebirth, and we can know that before Amenemhat, we also had other rebirths. Kemet has a long history. It doesn't have a short history. Its rebirth starts with the beginning of the third dynasty. You have tremendous rebirth. And then of course, after a while, things fall apart. And this is the same with the last one that we have a great memory of was the one with Taharqa. Taharqa discovered the decay of Kemet. He discovered that the books had been dusty, and they were dusty and falling apart. He discovered that the temples were in disrepair. So what did he do? What did he have to do? This is what I study. What did he have to do? He had to first of all remember the ancestors, and he had to revere the ancestors. And he saw the condition of the great books, and he saw the condition of the temples, and he studied and then restored and created a more durable society. So when it comes to us, it seems to me that part of this thing is certainly language. And that's why I love the linguists, because the people who are in African language, they always give us these bases. But now we know we have 3,200 languages throughout the continent of Africa, which means that all those languages don't use Wehimesu. So what we have to do is to take this term and other terms that we discover, and we have to make them more popular. And we have to not only use them, but we have to restore these societies based on the memory, because I think it's the lack of imagination, the lack of creativity that causes societies to run out of steam. There's much more I can say, but I don't want to talk on and on, but I think it's important that we have to understand that for me, language is important, but ideology is important. You cannot have any Wahime a Renaissance without memory. You got to know how to recreate memory for people. You got to have a group of promoters of the idea. You could call them the chapters of AI or whoever, but they have to embrace the idea, and that idea has to become national and international. You've got to have people in political power acting in the interest of Africa, whether they're leaders or presidents. You've got to have architects and writers and masters of culture.
Dr. Asante.
So
anyway,
think I'm just, you can't, it's just not just, language is important, but you gotta have all these other pieces.
I was going to say, Dr. Asante, I think you're jumping ahead a little bit. You're taking some of Tristan and Wahida's questions for the panel. But Wahida's sister Mama Bayyinah Bello just joined us. So could you formally welcome her into the discussion, please?
Absolutely, yeah. Professor Bayyinah, welcome to the chat. We have introduced yourself as well, but I do want to give you a few seconds just to formally introduce yourself, and also just let us, the audience, know a little bit about maybe anything that you're working on, or projects or anything like that.
It looks like she's frozen.
No. Okay, we're gonna continue on. Professor Bello, we will make sure at the end that we'll give you a moment to also speak. Okay. Hopefully we'll get you in the chat here with some questions as well. But at the end, we'll specifically give you a moment to let everyone know what you have going on. So there is a quote. I want to get into the next question.
May I please? I just really to this conversation about language, and I say that I agree with both Dr. Ọbádélé and Dr. Asante. That African language or any language is really part of culture and conveys the culture, and that's very important for us to really reconnect with our languages and speak our languages. But I agree with Dr. Asante that the ideology is very important as well, and I'm thinking about this in particular in relation to Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I don't know if you remember that he made a big deal of writing in Gikuyu. He said, he had a language. He was no longer going to write in English. He was going to write in Gikuyu. And, we applauded this. This was so refreshing, right? And he said that any literature written by an African person in a European language did not qualify as African literature. But then when you start reading the reasons that Ngugi wa Thiong'o gives for writing in an African language, you realize that he's deeply grounded in a Eurocentric paradigm.
Absolutely.
So that therefore, what he's actually conveying in Gikuyu is European culture and the European worldview. And so the issue of language is more complex than just writing in the language or speaking the language. It's also about what are we saying in our language? Are we speaking our own voice? Are we speaking our own truth, right? Or are we doing the devil's work?
Yeah.
After all, the Bible is translated in a myriad African languages, right? So the issue of content, of ideological orientation, of location is crucial. And I think they both go hand in hand, and we have to be very careful about that, and not necessarily discard an African person who cannot speak a continental African language.
Right.
Absolutely. They may still be speaking our African truth, as difficult as it is, and I'm not encouraging that, don't get me wrong, but that's also where we are, many of us, So because of the drama, because of the Martha and so on and so forth. So I think the language issue is a complex one, but we have to speak our languages, and we have to speak our truth in our languages.
Absolutely. real quick, Professor Bello, are you able, is your mic working? Are you frozen? We just want to get you introduced to say everybody in, and we'll go to the next question. Professor Bello? Okay, I'll go ahead to the next question. Dr. Charles Finch III, he has a quote I'd like to read real quickly. For Diop and for those who have followed him, the study of Kemet's place in African history is fundamental to the African Renaissance he envisaged, much the way the rediscovery of the values of Greek civilization gave impetus to the European Renaissance of 4 centuries ago. It demands a wholesale reassessment of African and world history. I know that Dr. Asante kind of spoke on this a bit. Dr. Mazama, can you speak to the importance of education, whether it's homeschooling or Afrocentric schooling, and how it's related to our African Renaissance?
I think that's really key. First of all, I like to make this distinction, and it's not mine, of course, between schooling and education, right? So there's no Afrocentric schooling, there's Afrocentric education, right? And again, going back to our ancient classical roots in Kemet, Nuga, and understanding what the purpose of education is, which is really to affirm that you are divine and reach a higher level of consciousness. So that's extremely important, especially the context in which we have found ourselves for way too long, which is one of debasement and degradation and ignorance of self, hatred of self, all of this, the expected outcome of a system of anti-African propaganda and pro-European, propaganda, of course. And this is what schooling is about. So education, Afrocentric education, that's the only type of education that I know of, that I can think of. Everything else is propaganda. It's extremely important. And that's why, in Afrocentric International, we take this to heart, and we produce, those workbooks, those Afrocentric workbooks, which basically consist of biographies of people who, from our standpoint, qualify as heroes, right? As people who are remarkable. And there are some criteria to be in the book. And one of them is that you must have sacrificed for your people. You must have shown courage, boldness, vision, and you must have been willing to die for African people. And we really need, again, to go back to models, to generate models, based on our own, experiences, our own memory, like Dr. Asante mentioned. That's extremely important. And again, if we do not socialize our young people the way they need to be socialized, then we will continue on the same path of denial and self-negation.
Brother Tristan, I think it's going to go to the next question.
Okay, so the next question we have here. So now,
hey Tristan, but before you ask your question, it looks like Mama Bayyinah Bello isn't frozen anymore. So you want to just let her get in just really quick before you go.
Thank you.
You have to unmute Mama Bello. Just do a quick introduction and let us know what you got going on.
All right. Greetings to all.
Hotep.
Alafia, Jumbo. We can go on. But anyway, I'm happy to be able to be with you this afternoon. I'm happy I got confused and was thinking you were 3 o'clock before I realized that I made a mistake and jumped in. And now they're, So hopefully we will be able to, the key thing that we could say, Renaissance is such a vast program. No one can say it's this one or this one thing, but each one of us have something to bring, and each one of us can go ahead from our heart, just go ahead and do what we feel is the strongest thing. Somebody feels it's linguistics, then go ahead and work. The other one sees a history, go ahead and work. Science, whatever, because at some point, all of us are going to join in the circle and bring our contribution. So for now, you might be 10 steps ahead of me. I might be 20 steps behind you, but it doesn't matter. We each have to go on, whatever it is that we feel this is what our contribution is, because we each are unique. There isn't a one-man program. In fact, I think one of the things I read this week about this whole disease situation is that somebody was saying that the biggest mistake the Euro Christians make about
Mama Bello, you're free.
Is the fact that they want to have one formula for everybody, and each to frozen.
Yeah, you're freezing up a bit. You want to make sure that we can hear you clearly and get to the question, but we also want to make sure that you're able to answer the questions and participate also. Perhaps if you log out and log back in, it might assist with some of the connectivity.
Okay. Am I still frozen?
Okay, we can hear you now. Go ahead. You're freezing up again. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
right.
sometimes turning off the camera is helpful to preserve bandwidth, so
Thank
at
you.
least the audio will be able to come through.
All right. Okay. Turning off the camera. Okay, camera is off. Is that okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is it okay?
Yeah. Yes. Much clearer.
Okay. Okay. Each one of us have a contribution to bring to the Renaissance of our people. Just like the body, we said anatomy of a Renaissance. So there are bone builders, there are muscles builders, there's a respiratory specialist, et cetera, et cetera. So each has to go ahead and do whatever they know, whatever they feel is what they have to contribute. And each one of us have to respect each of the others and let everyone do the work they have to do until the moment comes where we all come together to bring our various contributions and create that one body. But for now, it may look like, you know, you're not doing what you should be doing. Somebody else think it's the other way, but we just have to be more, there isn't time, because those who are working on our destruction, they are not waiting. So everybody has to be real and serious about what they do. But at the same time, one cannot tell the other, what you're doing is not it. This is the way it should be done. This is the field that you should be in. I think it's important for us to work those two elements. Each one of us has a work to do, and each one of us has a contribution. And we are not all on a line. We are on different steps of the construction, different levels of the construction. So I think if we look at it that way, we each will be more helpful to each other, and we can get to where we want to go much faster.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brother Tristan, you wanted to go to the next question?
All right, so next question. So speaking of that, how can we bridge the organizational efforts between African people in diaspora and African people in the continent? It's an open question.
Okay. Well, I think we should work each wherever you are. We have to do a lot of bridging wherever we are. If you're in Ayiti, there are many branches, many different people doing different things. So there is already a need there to conglomerate. In South America, in the Antilles, et cetera, et cetera. one of the things I believe would help is that as the colonials have gone through a lot of effort to make us fearful of one another, let's say, for example, on the islands, Jamaicans are this way, Puerto Ricans are that way, Haitians are this one, each one has the prejudices of the oppressors in our minds against each other. So if we can already begin to eliminate some of that and begin to try to get our own opinion, and I believe one element that could help is we have no real mastery of our people in all the various colonial languages. For example, if I'm trying to learn about Brazil, I have a lot of problem because I don't speak Portuguese. But if there was a book about Brazilian history that would be in 3 of the 5 domineering colonial languages, then all of us, whether you speak French, English, Spanish, Portuguese, or whatever, if we all can read the same material, have the same information, we would already be closer to being together than, but usually whatever is published in Spanish is in Spanish, whatever is published in English is in English. So one of the things that Fondation Félicité wants to do is to try to produce information in the 5 colonial languages, so that would enable our people to know about each other from a different point of view.
If I may, to add to that, I really would like to support that last point, because it's an extremely important one. I remember years ago, Thomas Sankara in Ouagadougou called a conference of what was at that time called the All African Peoples Institute. And I was a member of that institute, but of course, just before we convened, he was killed. Nevertheless, because this was supported by some outside funding from the AU, we went ahead several months later. And the idea behind this was that, just the idea that Sister Bello has just mentioned, that we would have one place on the African continent where all of the histories of African people, wherever they are, would go to that place, and there would be a class or group of translators who would translate all of this information so that into different languages, so that we will all have the same information. I think that's a very important project, and I think it's one that that some organization, perhaps it would be great if it could be undertaken by a national organization like Burkina Faso had planned to do, but certainly it could be done by AU. AU needs to have a bureau. They have a Bureau of African Languages. They have but one where it calls for all information about Black people living in Mexico, Black people living in Colombia, Black people living in Argentina, wherever Black people are, that information is sent so that we all have a common history. And I appreciate what Parat is doing, because what Parat is doing this for school children. And in fact, I've recommended some people to write to her because of this, because all of these books that are being developed so that our children have common knowledge. We don't have common knowledge. People don't know. The problem with the Dominicans and the Haitians, part of it is that the Dominicans don't realize their own history. So, and even if we had this history, this would just be the base, the foundation from which we can then get additional information, you see? And it's extremely important point to have our information passed on. Those of us who read or speak other languages, colonial languages, we do have some access, but it's more than that. It needs to be, for example, some of us speak Arabic, but there are tons of books and information in Arabic about history, about our history, that the Arabs told from their own point of view, which needs to be redone, reread, revised. There's a lot to be done, but a Renaissance would undertake all of this. You cannot have a Wehemesu without doing this and without having a full understanding and appreciation of the difficulties we have, but of the strength that we have and of the victory that is certain.
I wanted to jump in here and emphasize again that for me, the question of philosophical orientation is crucial. I don't want any information about Brazil. I don't want any information about Haiti or Jamaica if that information is not written from our standpoint. Because there will just be more, confusion, more misorientation. And I heard what Bayyinah Bello was saying, that everybody should just do their own thing and hopefully we'll get together. I'm not sure that I agree with that approach. I think we've been doing this for way too long. We need direction. You see, we meet people, small groups who are doing things, but they are ideologically misguided. Mm-hmm. And one group, which I think is very misguided, and I think Dr. Asante, you and I have had this conversation within AI as well, is, people who work for or toward, or who call themselves Pan-African, right? And they organize those big gatherings. But then when you look inside, you see that they're all over the place. Some are Marxists, some are Christians, some are feminists, some are gay, some are this, some are that. And then unavoidably, then there's a big clash.
Absolutely.
And Africa remains as, disunited as ever. We need an ideology upon which will guide us with our Renaissance, our rebirth, and that can only be Afrocentricity. I don't see any other way. I've looked at it, I don't see any other way.
If I could, I want to say that I agree with that 100%, because part of the creation of Afrocentricity International was the idea of looking and trying to determine what was it, what is it that that has not allowed us to come together and to be as united as we ought to be. And what we came to was the idea that it was an ideological problem. And we have a crisis of ideology. We have people who say that they are Pan-Africanists, but when you really begin to question and look at what their practices are, we see that they don't work necessarily in the best interest of Africa. They work in the best interest of Marxism. They work in the best interest of Islam. They work in the best interest of Christianity, but they don't work in the best interest of Africa. And that's a big problem. Until we are able to break through that, then Africa itself does not express its own personality and its own character. So I appreciate that, Parag.
If I can also hop in on this, I'm actually working on an article right now, and it's looking at, as a matter of fact, I'll just share my screen briefly just to illustrate this. But it's what's called aggressive ideological mimicry. So in ethology, you have what's called aggressive mimicry, where you see on the left-hand side, that type of firefly, it pretends to be the female of the on the right-hand side. So now the male firefly comes, and guess what? It gets eaten. And this is what happens with people who are all Africanism and all these other things, that they will say Pan-African, but when you get there, you realize the content is wholly devoid from the Black survival thrust, is wholly devoid of the African equals Black power and everything that the people who invented the word Pan-Africanism, were all about. So these are some of the things that we have to be very wary of. So I definitely would like to, be in agreement with what Mazama is saying, that we can't divorce the content from, the form. I also would like us to just briefly touch on, like earlier we were talking about specialization. And I think that this is one thing that we can also look at. And I'd like to read a quick quote from Baba Amos Wilson on this point. And I'm also sharing my screen so those who can see can also read out loud or read along, where he says, so science doesn't just pop up because you know science or just because you're some scientific genius. It must be what? Supported. And African science and technology in the hands of African people will not become so until African culture support that science and until African economic systems can afford to pay for it. And that's why an African who majors in engineering and chemistry must also major in political science and government and economics and other things. That's why as an African, you got to be much more broadly educated than a European, because the Europeans have already structured their system economically, socially, and so forth. So therefore, they can send their young in and give them a narrow scientific education that's just based purely on technique because all the other parts are put together. But in nations that are developing, the scientists themselves have to also have a working knowledge of related areas so that they can build a structure necessary for growth and development of science. So when you go to European institutions where you're just taught chemistry alone and math alone and so forth, you still have not yet become an African scientist, you understand? And simply because you're sitting in those courses and they're not talking about economics doesn't mean you're getting a necessary and appropriate education. An African science class discusses politics and economics along with science and technology. You have to understand these kinds of things. Now, this really goes into knowledge, and can knowledge be dichotomized and separated into these so-called areas? So like for me, I don't say I'm a linguist, even though I have a PhD in linguistics, that I'm an African, which means that like I'm studying ethology, I study astrophysics. You know, every evening we look at nature documentaries because that's where I get my conceptual frameworks from recently. So we have to know all of these things and now apply it to the Black survival thrust and see how it relates for it to be, oh, well, you're in education. My father talks about getting your different selves together, that we can no longer deal with this thing of, oh, well, you're in health, all right, but then you're driving, you know, some Eurasian car. Okay, well, you're in economics, but then you got this huge pot belly, or you're in this and you're in that. So we have to know self-protection. We have to know, you know, every single area, because knowledge is not dichotomized and compartmentalized into these different disciplines that we're told we're supposed to be in, that as Africans, we understand that, you know, we have to deal with this holistically. And I'll pass it back and then circle back around for a couple other points later on.
Yes, well said. I agree with you totally.
Oops.
Speaking of, you know, economics and government and politics, I want to just, you know, kind of segue that into the next question. We wanted to touch upon the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and talk about the AU, the African Union. Why have they been unable to advance Pan-Africanism at a governmental level? What are the limitations of the AFCA agreement in terms of, you know, they're at the mercy of Western imperialists and neo-colonial puppets? Do we need to build our own trade and develop our own trade relations with each other?
If I may jump in real quick, I really believe that we need to stop chasing gods that are not of ours. And I'm quoting here Bangu. We need a paradigmatic shift. African people must stop running or seeking development, right? We really must redefine for ourselves what it is that we need, that we think is worth having, and redefine, you know, for ourselves what our reality should look like. And I think many things will fall in place, including this, you know, economic aspect and all those the tricks that are being set up for us to become more and more dependent on the West, economically, but also mentally, because we follow models that we did not generate.
And real quick, if I can also hop in, I just posted an excerpt from an article that explained why Haiti would not be admitted as a member state of the African Union. And it says, according to Article 29.1 of the AU's Constitutive Act, only African states can join the African Union. Now, this is the same continentalist, you know, BS that we're talking about, where, you know, you have this idea of continentalism, where it's about unification with whoever happens to be on the African continent, even though they are the enslavers, colonizers, and rapists of African people for the last 5,000 years. So when we're talking about a paradigmatic shift, the AU is doing exactly what it was designed to do. You know, bankrolled by Gaddafi, what do you expect from this? So what we really need is global Kemet. As Nana Marcus Garvey wrote in African Fundamentalism, he spoke about a Negro empire on which the sun never sets, right? So this is essentially what we're saying. Any place where you see Black people, that is Kemet. Once we understand what Kemet means, it's not just a label, it's saying that this is the land of Black people. So thereby Haiti is Kemet, right? Thereby Jamaica, well, parts of it, that's still Kemet. You still got occupied territory right here on the continent. And this even comes back to the point of even using the term Africa, because if we understand etymologically, one is opaque, and there's nothing in any of the various 8 different etymologies that are given for it that lets you know that that means land of Black people exclusively. And besides that, you know, after the Third Punic War, you had, you know, Carthage being defeated, and then Rome calls this little thin strip of coastal land, you know, including Tunisia, a little bit of Libya, a little bit of, they call that Provincia Africa Proconsularis, which is their African province, a defeated province. So, you know, for us to use the term like we're politicizing it, but when you look at it, this is the name of a defeated province. So what we need to do, in my view, is one, we need to use terms that are, you know, expressing not only an African origin, right? We're still using the term, but an origin that actually shows that this is the land of Black people. And that can be in any and every African language. So if we look at the Chi language, Abibimang translates to nation of African people, Black people, the Bibi translates to Black, and Yoruba Ile Adulawo is again land of Black people. If you look at Bamanakan, what they call Bambara, the word is Farafina, which is land of Black people. If you look at Wolof Reo Nitkunyo, right, land of Black people. If you look at Kikongo, Nsia Bandombe. If you look at, you know, Igbo in DCOG, they're talking about Black people. So all of these languages are very clear. So when we conceptualize the world from our own worldview, then we will let you know, well, if this is called the land of Black people, but what are you Arab invaders doing here, right? So I think that this is very key. And then also, this is in relation to the points that were brought up before as language. This is a model, right? This is a group called Shemsu Bak, which I was a part of for, I think a little under a year. We had a little bit of, you know, disagreement, let me say, because there was outright fraud in the group where they were saying that Ma'at means basically some neoliberal concepts. We said, no, it wasn't. But besides that, you know, I think that this is a model where they're doing translations of Medu Necha into Akan, Bambara, English, Francais, Hausa, Kikongo, Kiswahili, Lingala, Portuguese, Pula, Wolof, Zulu, right? So for the most recent book, I did the Yoruba translation for that one. Now the problem, and this goes back to what Per Ahad was saying, is that if they have an anti-Black ideology, then you're gonna see that in the introduction, and that's exactly what you see here. You basically see Marxism grafted onto Kemet, right? So you know, I would just say that in full agreement that the content can't be divorced from the form. And at the same time, we can look at some of the work that's already been done on the ground. So we're not limited to the dominating Eurasian models, because I started learning Capoeira, and I said, I didn't come here for Portuguese linguistic imperialism. So we stopped singing in Portuguese, we started singing in African languages, that, you know, we can start to say, okay, we can use these as a bridge, but then beyond the bridge, what's the Black standard that we're striving for? And then I'll continue back later on.
So we do have a few more minutes, and I know we have so much information we wanted to cover, from defense and military to technology to politics and art. But I do want to segue to the next, just jump a bit to the next question, so that we can still have some time for Q&A. Brother Tristan, did you want to ask the next question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
For the next question, what is, because one of the things we talk about, you know, African worldview, African perspective, and keeping us centered. And one of the things that I think that is fundamental to that is our spiritual systems. That's just something I've observed, and we've all observed that in some capacity. So the question I want to ask is, what is the role or what is the role of African spiritual systems in organizing African people?
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear. Oh, we can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, you know, when we're having, let me make a point from what we were talking before. To me, everything you said, everything that was said before was, that's the base. I mean, an ideology, there's no debate about it. There's, you know, the mental structure, there's no debate. Now, once you have all this, then this is where I come in, where I came in with, we each can work in our different areas and then we'll bring it back together. So to go back to your question, spirituality, again, in the African world, we do not have a knowledge that is divided into spirituality is here, science is there, this is here, medicine is the other place, architecture, blah, 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 blah. You're going to build a house, then it's automatic that you go and figure out, talk to that land, see what's what kind of spirit are involved. And so you know how to face your house, what is the wind, what is the this, what is the that, you take everything into consideration, what other people would call scientific and whatever, but it's all in one. There is no architecture without spirituality. There is no mathematics without spirituality. There is no artistry without spirituality, okay? So in my own experience, for example, when I first started doing research on the women, Ayiti's women, and at first I only knew one or two women, the Empress Felicite and Dede were the two people I knew. And I talked about them. And to me, that was the end of the world. That was it. Until in a dream, this military woman came and said, "You always talking about Empress Felicite. There are other women, there are plenty, and me, I'm Lieutenant Sanit Belair." I had never heard this name before. And for maybe 2 years, she kept coming into my dreams. And the last time she says, "Go to the Library of Congress, Washington, DC, 6th floor." So the next time I traveled, I went to the Library of Congress, Washington, DC, 6th floor, and almost the first book I saw, Lieutenant Sanit Belair of Ayiti. So what is the difference, you know, what is the role of spirituality into whatever we're going to talk about? The problem is precisely because these people have divided knowledge into all these little boxes and put spirit and eliminate spirituality and want to replace it with religion. That's where the problem lies. But as we grow into ourselves, as we restructure our mind, as we make that shift that is necessary, then spirituality is the center of our lives. And it doesn't matter what field you go into, you will find your spirituality right at the center of whatever you do. And the same is true with governing. Spirituality is a very important part of governance. And as far as I'm concerned, what brought in the demise of Egypt is that at some point, people wanted to use those who had the knowledge, the spiritual knowledge, or I can't say that everybody had it, those who were considered the higher ups, like the priest, the priestesses, wanted to use that knowledge, the knowledge they had, as a tool, as a weapon into the governing of the country to dominate those who were in position of governance. And that's when a lot of things went wrong, as far as I'm concerned. That's, you know, my analysis. But when everyone understood that spirituality was part of everything and everything we needed to do, we need to know the spiritual core of it, then, you know, we had better, in any of our countries, things went better when we did not try to use the knowledge of spirituality as a weapon into governing our people.
Speaking of weapons, I do want to ask one more question here. According to the UN World Population Prospect, 60% of the continent of Africa is under 25 years old. How can we more effectively capture the hearts and minds of the youth by weaponizing things like art and entertainment?
Well, see, for me, art is not entertainment. We have never created anything so we could look at it. Every design, every mask, every sculpture has a purpose, and a purpose in our lives. So it's simultaneously, yes, it's beautiful. Yes, we can, but it's not made to be admired, but it's made for to function, to handle a particular function. I have a mask that I will use for either this, that, or the other, but there is a useful reason for its existence, and it has a functional purpose. So with that said, whether dancing, whether singing, whether painting, whatever we do has a purpose. And that's when we've come into this division of religion, and then art is over here and art is just done so we can admire. Art has no purpose. That's not us. We had a case of, what's the name of this guy? Magloire, Stevenson Magloire, a painter in Ayiti. And at some point, he's painting these paintings, and people felt that this had to do with the situation, the governmental situation. So at some point, the government started to chase down that young man, that painter. And he told them, I have already done my work. Your time is up. It doesn't matter if I die or live. My work is done. And those who know about the story know that, of course, within a few months of he was killed. Within a few months, the government was out also. So art is not just for art. We have to think in terms of purpose, everything. A song has a purpose. A dance has a purpose. Whatever we do, it has purpose. And that's what we need to get back to understand the purpose of things and not take them as just decoration.
If I may add, Sister Waida, in response to your question, I think that's why the work of an organization like AI in Africa is so important. That we can operate really at the grassroots level, try to educate, like I said before, our people, change our consciousness, and then hopefully have young artists, stem from that and really produce work that is in whatever domain they choose, that is truly enlightening and elevating for our people, because that's what we are lacking. We don't have enough of this. It goes back to what Karanga was saying, that we have a national cultural crisis, and we need artists to really bring us back to that level of greatness, which is really what we are. We are a great people. We just have forgotten it, or we've been made to forget it. And so I think that it's extremely important. And I think that the statistics you have, it's I don't think it's only 25 years old. I think it's much more, something like 19 years old. The African population is extremely young, and this is a great asset for us. And there's, things are looking really bright in that regard.
Absolutely.
If I may, I would add purpose. The artist creates something with purpose, song, the dance, the painting. And when our children are exposed to purposeful art, purposeful books, purposeful whatever, then the rise is facilitated. The consciousness is facilitated.
I also wanted to come here and then also bring another term that I think is relevant. We've introduced Wahim Mesut, that there's also another very powerful term, Seruj Ta. And this is at the time of, again, going back to Kemet, that here you have Iri E Seruj Ta Juref Manu Her Aha, which is I restored the whole land with trees and vegetation, but it actually says Manu in here, which isn't translated in this book, and this is Tate Maulana Karenga, but Manu is monuments. So this relates to the discussion about what is art for, what is, and even the degree to which we should refer to anything that we do as art, because I'm always suspect anytime we put the word African in front of a Eurasian term. So we'll say, okay, well, there's art, well, here's African art. Well, here's philosophy, now here's African philosophy, because what we do is that we censor the Eurasian, worldview, we censor the term, and now we just kind of even say, here's an African version of that thing. But here, I think this is one thing that when you say Seruj, that this is to repair, to restore, right? And then Ta is the land. And I think that this is another thing that we can look at, that the role of quote unquote art, just for lack of a better term, we could say Manu, I think that's better, would be to assist our land, Kemet, global Kemet, in flourishing. Also, just to the point, one thing was discussed about spirituality. Now, one thing about what we refer to as spirituality, even the term spirit, is very limiting in terms of what we're talking about in an African context, a Kemetiu context, because when you look etymologically at the word spirit, it's coming from spirare in Latin, and spiritus is breath, but that's just one of the many, many aspects of the African self, which in Akan that would be like hon, which is the breath, right? But then there's also the kra, which comes from Onyame and is responsible for your destiny. There's also the sunsum, which comes from your father and is responsible for your character. There's the moja, which ties you to your matriclan, and also to all of your physical possessions. There are just all these other aspects, but when we say spirituality, it's like we're trying to deal with a concept that is multifaceted in a language that is bereft of the ability to even deal with it. So we understand, as Kemetiu, that when we say spirituality, we mean all the different things, but that's correlated to only one small fragment of what it is that we would talk about, because in English, you have 50 different terms in Akan that would all just translate to spirit. If I say Obosom, oh, well, that's spirit. If I say Sunsum, oh, that's spirit. If I say Osama, that's spirit. It's a impoverished language, and we're trying to express very deep Kemetiu concepts in order to say that. So just yesterday, I was at Mampong, and I'll close on this. And as we passed by Nana Damiti Ajimai, that this is the Obosom there that's responsible for warfare, the one who we go to when we're about to go to war. So as we passed by, I said, Nana Damiti Ajimai and the Bamuchidom Hene, so the Bamuhene, he said, Mancrado. And Mancrado is a quote unquote political position. And that's because that Obosom has that position called Mancrado in the nation. So every Obosom relates to another Obosom in respect to how a quote unquote military and political structure would have. So you have, for example, a Sujabi, who's the Ochiame, which is the spokesperson. So each Obosom is basically, it's an overlapping system where each Obosom has the same structure as the political structure, which is the same structure as the military structure in Akan society. And I think it's something that's profound that we should look at, because anytime you go into a shrine, you will find who's the Okomfohene and the Okomfohema, the masculine and feminine, rulers, for lack of a better translation, of that shrine. And then that person has an Ochiame, that person, has a Mancrado, that person has a Chidom, that person has all of these different political. But I think that because we're so used to Eurasian structures, anytime we set up an organization or an association or whatever, we know what the Eurasian structure looks like, so we just kind of graft that onto what we do. So there has to be, all right, there's a president, and then here's a vice president, then there's a treasurer, and then there's this secretary, there's this, there's that. So I'm the secretary of African Studies Association of Africa, right? So that is a case in point. It's letting us know that we can't even conceptualize what a structure should be out of the context of that exact same structure that we get from Eurasians. president, vice president, so forth and so on. But if we were thinking as Kemetu, right, not just ancient Kemetu, but contemporary Kemetu, we would start thinking, okay, who's going to be the Ohene and the Ohema, right? The masculine and feminine complementary rulers of this. Who's going to be the Ochiami? Who's going to be the spokesperson who now, you know, navigates conversations between folks? Who's going to be the Mancrado? Who's going to be the Chidom Hene? Who's going to be the Adonte Hene? Who's going to be this? When we start structuring things like that, this lets us know that we're actually functioning as Kemetu as opposed to Eurasians in blackface.
Total agreement. Absolutely. That's why we don't have no president, no secretary at Fondation Félicité. Until we can get something more correctly ours, we go with one title, responsible, since we see that's one of our lackings. So you're responsible for, everybody is responsible for, and that's it.
I want to say thank you so much to the panel. I would like to invite you all back to maybe a part 2 because we haven't even gotten to quite a number of questions. How are we looking on time? How much time does the panel have for just a few Q&A questions? And so if you could give some closing remarks, just a quick sentence or two on the Uhem Mesut.
Well, I will go first, again, I want to thank you, thank AI Philadelphia for putting this panel together and this very important discussion. And I would say that, again, just in a nutshell, for me, the issue is really one of paradigmatic shift. And it's very complex, and I'm very grateful for all the comments. I've received lots of food for thought. But we really need to get back to ourselves. It's going to be a long process, but then I think we're on our way. We have to be patient, but not too patient, because like you said, our enemies don't sleep. They're really working against us 24 hours a day, so we cannot be too complacent. But we really need to gain a very clear ideological direction. And again, I believe that Afrocentricity is that ideological direction. And I believe also that at the heart of Afrocentricity, there's a return to our ancestral days. And that's, you can call it spirit, whatever we want to call it, but we really have to connect and remain connected to our ancestors. If there's one thing that unites us as African people, that's what it is, right? This connection with our ancestors, that at least we understand this to be important. Whether we practice it or not is a different story. And because we're dislocated, oftentimes we don't, but it is really of critical importance. And that's part of being Afrocentric. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you to my venerable colleagues here on the panel.
Thank you. Dr. Asante, any closing remarks before we open up to Q&A quickly?
I think Dr. Asante may have fallen off the line.
Dr. Asante?
I think Dr. Asante may have fallen off the line.
Oh, okay. Dr. Ọbádélé, any closing remarks before we open up Q&A quickly?
I got to unmute myself. I just wanted to share where I actually learned the term Uhem Mesut in the book Medu Necha by Imahu Jeji Shemsu Jehuti, also known as Dr. Jacob Carruthers. And he says, if we add to this scheme the concept Uhem Mesut, the repetition of the birth proclaimed by Pharaoh Amenemhat as his Horus name, we will understand Kemetic history as its makers understood it. The ascending Pharaoh always evoked the Septepi, the beginning, especially after a time of trouble. The Uhem Mesut theme was also used by Seti I after the disorder brought about by Amenhotep IV, also known as Akhenaten. The same spirit was embraced by Pianki and Shabaka, and we always like to use titles, but I'm quoting, when they sought to restore the national culture after several centuries of drift. And I think this is something that Baba Molefi Asante mentioned, was he mentioned that Shabaka, Nesubiti Shabaka, he actually had these worm-eaten papyri restored in what is now known as the Shabaka stone, right? And this is the creation story about Ptah, about the creation story of Men Nefer. And when we know that, it's because of the work that Nesu Biti Shabaka did in order to preserve that text. So we can actually read that text, and we're connected by thousands of years with that. So I just wanted to also share that. So if people are also interested in that term and reading more about that term, this is a key text for you to read. And this text is key because it points you to the primary text that you can go to actually read the words of our ancestors, as Baba Jedi Shemsu Jehuti said, without these European interpreters. And I would also add to that any of these Eurasian interpretations, because you can have people who look Black who are now bringing some basically Karl Marx goes to Kemet type of analysis, and that's not going to do it.
Thank you, Asante. Professor Bello, real quickly, can you just tell us what you have going on and how we could reach you, and any closing remarks that you have on the topic?
Well, this month of May has been very busy at Fondation Félicité. We celebrated the birthdays of the Empress Félicité, Queen Marie-Louise, the birthday of Malcolm X on the 19th, of Toussaint Louverture on the 20th of May. The two ladies were on the 8th of May. The flag on the 18th of May. So May is a very busy month for us. How to touch, our email is bayyinah@fondationfelicite.com. Closing remarks. It is a good thing. I thank you for inviting me to this. It is a great thing for us to be exchanging on our Renaissance. To me, the biggest thing is that we must project. We must look into the future. We must do planning 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years ahead. Where do we want to be in such and such 5 years from now? Okay, let's say we say, well, we want to have the 5 or 10, whatever number of artistry of these 10 countries and 5 colonial languages for all those who only have those. And then in the 3 or 5 African languages. So we set the work, we set the objective, and we put people to work. So we know 5 years from now, we'll have that. 7 years from now, we must have our own bank, our own banking system, because it's not about bank. If it's just bank, it's not gonna get us no further than we are today. But we need to have people who know how to create a system, a banking system for us. We need people who are thinking about it and planning and plotting. What type of government we need in our various countries. Not only in each country, there should be people instead of, we usually spend, I know in Ayiti, we do this a lot. Oh no, this government is no good, they're doing this, they're doing this. The list of what's not working. It's not what we need. We need to put our energies into, we need a type, here's the type of president we need, if there has to be a president. Here's a type of Mansa or Oba or whatever it is we decide we want to do. But we must structure into what are the competences that we need in the various places that would make our country take its own shape and not be what enemies have decided that it should look like. So planning and plotting. And I have begun this among my own grandchildren. I'm not into the birthday parties, but if you are going to turn 16, 17, 18, and you have a plan, a 5-year plan for your life, then grandma is gonna do anything that she can to help you bring your plan into reality. So the party has to turn into a program. And if we do it in the individual, into the families, we inspire our children at 16, you're a big girl now. You should know what you want to be at 22, at 23, where you're going to be, what you need to get there. Let's get that done. And let's get the family together and see, okay, I can take care of your shoes. I can take care of blah, blah, blah. I can take care of school. I can contribute this to your food, whatever. But we need to look at the family in a different way, a way that we want to support our children, encourage them to create their vision, to make a plan, and then find the right support in the family to do what they want to do. If we start it that way, then we will have people who are accustomed to making plans, personal plans, individual plans. And now they're going to find it normal. If as a person, I make a 5-year plan for myself, then for my country, I can't talk about no 5-year plan. I need a 25-year plan. I need a 50-year plan. Then you are developing people with vision and who know that it takes effort, sacrifices, discipline in order to get a goal, to reach a goal. You must have discipline. You must be willing to sacrifice. You must be willing to put in lots of effort, lots of determination to get to success. That's my contribution. So to be able to, for a Renaissance, even more effort, greater self-sacrifice. Dessalines said, it takes individual sacrifices to bring in collective victory. Individual sacrifices to bring in collective victory. So if we're not willing to give up anything in what we're doing now, then don't expect a better tomorrow. But remember, the enemy is at work, always at work. They have planned to eliminate us in masses. They have planned for mass disease, mass poverty, whatever. What are your plans? What do you plan to do? How do you fight back? And don't be afraid. People sometimes say, oh, well, they have nuclear power, they have this, they have that. Well, you know, when we were doing the war in 1800s, they had all the power that there was, and we had nothing. We demonstrated that if you are yourself, and to me, that's the key thing. The Haitians of 1800s became truly themselves, fully themselves, and assumed their responsibility that no one was going to come and help. No God, no Jesus, no nothing is going to come and help unless you decide you want to help yourself. And that's what made the difference between all the people who were fighting throughout the Americas and the Haitian. The Haitian had 3 major tools: a world vision through voodoo, B, a language, and C, get whatever weapons was around and transform it into your own. And it's a family thing. Women, men, children, everybody was in the battle. It was not a man military whatever. So please, it's a good model. It gives us a good principles to follow. So assume who you are. Be willing to sacrifice. With no sacrifice, no individual sacrifice, there is no collective victory. Be blessed. Be yourself. Be your divine self. We can change this entire world in the next 7 years if we put ourselves to it, if we decide that's what we want. Asante.
Asante Sana, absolutely. Everyone has a role that they can play in Uha Masut. Real quickly, I would like to invite the panel back again. I think we definitely have more that we would like to ask and cover on the topic. We're going to open up about 10 minutes for Q&A. If you have your hand raised, I will call upon you. Please ask your question concisely. We'll start out with, and then after 10 minutes, we're going to close out with the prayer. Andre Turner, go ahead and unmute your mic and ask your question.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you all for having me. My question is real simple. I'm initiating to an African spiritual system. Think African. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, and just want to know what are some things I can do to support my son who is 7 around African socialization. He plays a djembe, does a number of things, but I just want to just get to a larger, higher space to be able to put some things in place. And he goes to a predominantly white school, which hurts me to my heart to say that. He goes to Friends, and I'm just going to stop there. And then we're thinking about taking him out and sending him to DC, but we just have to get our resources together. Thank you all for your time. Peace and power. And I'm just going to listen.
Anyone on the panel, please feel free to answer Brother Andre's question.
I could not hear well. What did he say? That he lives in Baltimore? Is that what he said?
Right.
Yes, he said Baltimore.
Okay. And he's concerned about the socialization of his son, who goes to an all-white school. You know, it always baffles me that we surrender our children to our enemies, and then we are worried. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. So first, you really should keep your son at home. You know, you should maybe try homeschooling or educating him at home. You know, and protecting him by grounding him into his own sense of, you know, ancestrality to begin with. You could get closer to Afrocentric International. We could definitely help you, you know, with that.
We can go to anyone have any other questions, please click on the participant button and then click the raise hand button, and we will call on you to ask the next question. Does anyone else on the panel have anything for Brother Andre?
Yeah, I would definitely like to concur. Oh, sorry, Mama Bayyinah. Go ahead.
Thank you. I would simply add, since, you know, the situation is what it is, while you're planning to change the situation, do at home the maximum to counterbalance, or I don't know what the right term is, but you need to do what is in the house. At least, you know, if the child goes to some school where they don't see themselves, what is in the house? How many, you know, do you have Black pictures? Do you have pictures of us in Kemet? Do you have pictures of powerful Black women and men around the child? What kind of film do you look at? What kind of music you have the child listen to? So there are a lot of things that there's a lot of work for the parent who make this kind of a choice. But remember, the school has the child 8 to 10 of its waking hours. You have 1 hour, maybe 2 before bedtime. So you really have to have a strong, powerful, exaggerated program while you combat this situation. And hopefully by next year, you make a different decision.
Brother Richard, next question. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
If I can also weigh in on this. A couple of days ago, I was listening to an interview by Na Chinwezu, an author who's written Decolonizing the African Mind, Decolonizing African Literature. And he was on the COWS, Context of White Supremacy program. And the host asked him, you know, what can we do to decolonize the African mind? And he said, well, the best thing is not to let them get colonized in the first place. And I think that this is right in alignment with what Mazama said, that, you know, if we surrender our children to the wolves, by all means, they will get bit. Or as my great grandma used to say, if you lay down with dogs, you get up with fleas. So we shouldn't be surprised if this child is acting just as that child is manufactured to act, because we know that these schools are factories to create anti-Africans. So, you know, not to, you know, make you feel bad or whatever, but you have to make a different choice. You have to now organize your time. You can start doing stuff online as a business so that you can be home. Just don't trade your time with your children for money, because ultimately you will realize that that child has gotten away from you and the things that you intended that child to have. And it's because you, you know, and well, I guess it is personal, you allowed that child to be colonized, and now you're going to try to, you know, decolonize that child small, as opposed to this child is uncolonizable territory. This child has never been colonized. And I think then you'll have a much better way to go. And what we do in our household, we have always taught our children ourselves. We've taught them in African languages. We've taught them African content. And, you know, just to this point, when I came to live in Ghana 2000, 2001, I was under the false impression that African languages couldn't possibly be used to speak as idiotic as English could. And then I was on a bus from Kumasi to Accra, and a guy came on and he started preaching biblical stuff about the imaginary white boy on a stick in Chi. And I just about burst into tears. I was like, yeah, you can be just as dumb in African languages. So it's always about the content as well as has been reiterated. So, you know, in the meantime, and I think that this is something that Mama Bayyinah has just spoken on, you can do what you can, but you have to get that child out of, you know, basically this toxic environment of throwing them to the wolves where they're going to get killed, you know, just mentally destroyed. And then, you know, we try to do something about it after the fact.
Yes.
Asante. Brother Richard,
Yeah,
Mike
yes.
asked a question.
Yes, I appreciate this dialogue, and I agree that it should continue to go on, and I really appreciate everybody being there. The question that came up in the question of the AU or about government, and helping us or me analyze or identify the leaders that you see embody with this discussion. Can y'all give us suggestions of if there is anybody who is embodying what this discussion today has been about, that's in that quote unquote, whether state leadership, whether it's on the continent or in the diaspora, because we use the names of Sankara and Malcolm and, you know, Harriet Tubman or Marie Louise, but who is it today that is embodying this that we can at least look towards or look at, that's in this time, in real time?
I would venture to say we could take a moment in people's life and say that in this moment or in this decision, okay, for example, I would say in that the president of Madagascar, when he decided to go against World Health Organization and come up with his own. Well, I don't know all the details, but to have the courage to stand up and say no to these people who are accustomed to hearing yes all the time, I say that moment is a moment where somebody had a level of consciousness and the courage to stand. Now we have to follow it very, very closely and see where it goes.
Parat, do you have any follow-up remark on that question?
Yeah, I think that we probably should, and I know it's not easy because I think maybe we need to stop looking for leaders for individual people, right? Like Sister Bayyinah Bello was saying, there are people in a particular moment that have what it takes, and that's wonderful, whether they can sustain that or not. But it's more the principles that at that time, the incoming that they stand for. This is what we really need to emulate and try to reproduce, replicate in our own lives, right? I mean, I can look at Julius Malema in South Africa, for example, and say, you know, I like his stand. Whether, you know, I would follow him on everything, I don't know. But you see, so because we must put it together and see where we need to go and what needs to happen and what it will take, you know, the courage to stand up. Basically, that's really what it is, and then be clear, you know, in terms of our Afrocentric orientation. And we must stop, I think, looking for leaders. We must try in our own lives to stand for those principles. And I think that way we'll go much faster because, you know, our enemies know very well what to do. They just eliminate leaders. They have Sankara shot, they have, you know, Malcolm X shot, and then what do we do? So we're looking for a transformation of our consciousness more so than we're looking for leaders.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sister Ebony, you have a question. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
On that as well, Sister Wahida. I think that Mama Bayyinah gives a very good approach in terms of looking at moments in people's lives. because I remember, like, I followed a little bit about Julius Malema in South Africa. And when I went to South Africa, I just started asking, you know, the everyday people, what do you think about him? Oh, well, he talks a good game and boom, boom. But people were very reserved about him. And I was surprised because I'm like, you know, he sounds like, you know, the real deal. And I remember listening to a speech where he starts talking about love gay people, it's their choice. And, you know, homosexuality is doing, you know, tell Manana be. So I was like, okay, I think this approach that Mama Bayyinah says is good. So you have this moment as opposed to just following a leader wholesale. And like Nana John Henry Clark says, you always have to ask leader, where are you leading me, right? So with that, we can see, all right, when this person is going in the right direction, the direction towards Ma'at, actual Ma'at, not Ma'at meaning, you know, any Eurasian term, but actual Ma'at, then we can say, all right, this is what I'm following. But when this person veers off to Isfet, then that person isn't leading anymore, right? That person has gone off the deep end somewhere. So now we're not following that person. You yourself may be the leader. I think those who are on the call right now, instead of looking, you know, for any president, from what I know of I'm a Mazama, from what I know of Mama Bayyinah, you know, there's a proverb that says, I pointed to the moon and all you saw is my finger. I think you're looking way, way off when the folks right here on the call, you know, would be the people you may need to look to for those who are actually embodying what they're saying and not just, you know, trying to get likes on Facebook and get views on YouTube. You know, I think that that's where it is. And then also think about how you are leading yourself, right? Even beyond looking to other people, you know, to what degree are you yourself on that path where you're now that example for others? Yeah.
Yep. August 14, 1791, Bookman told us, you, look inside of you for the way to freedom. You are the general and you are the soldier. So very important for us to understand. Assume our responsibilities. Assume the responsibilities. What we want to do, we must project. We must ourselves live it and not wait for someone to do it for us. And even I think this whole, you know, it's the pocket people in East Africa who've never had a leader of nothing. They don't have no kings, no queens, no mayors, no nothing. Everybody go about its business doing what it has to do and everybody knows how to behave. And if there's a problem, they'll choose 4 people who will sit down and solve the problem. And while they're doing this, other people will take care of their chores. And once the problem is solved, they come back and get to what they were doing before. So we have to really work at building our responsibility. Remember, there is no victory without sacrifice. And if you can't make sacrifices, if you're not responsible, if you're not clear on where you want to go, on what the ultimate aim is. So we have to absolutely inside, look for the leader, look for the best leader you can be. And that will be a big step toward victory.
Thank you, Professor Bello. Sister Ebony, you wanted to ask a question? We'll take 2 more questions and we'll wrap up.
Peace, everybody. I have enjoyed this tremendously. I was just asking, what would be the best, what, in everybody's opinion, what would be the best language to almost begin with? I did some Swahili with my little one, but I would like to have something that had more of a base. I was hearing the brother talk about how he was able to translate this to that, to this, to that. So I was wondering if anybody has a suggestion for us to start over again with.
What I'll do is I'll tell you a little bit about why I made the choices that I made, and you know, leave it to you to make the choices. So the languages that I studied formally in undergrad, I studied 1 semester of Kiswahili, and then I left it after that semester because I was looking to get out of these Eurasian languages. And I realized that Kiswahili had so much Arabic in it. There's a proverb in Chi that says, "Majani nkraneko to jem," which is I ran away from the fire ants and hopped right into the fire. So, you know, I was like, if I'm looking to de-whitenize and re-Africanize, then Kiswahili may not be as useful and pragmatic as it may be. That wasn't what I necessarily needed at that point in time. I also studied Medu Neter in undergrad. And, you know, I think that that was a very good choice, just in terms of being able to access the primary text, that without the primary text, folks are grasping at straws in terms of where stuff originates, where stuff comes from, what's the precedent for this and precedent for that. So if somebody starts talking to you about pedagogy, you've read texts about what pedagogy is that's never been colonized, right? You've read texts about this and that. So I think that that's something. She also studied that because I was in the position of Ochiame to my mother, who was at that time training to be an Okomfor, which is a healer, diviner in the Akan spiritual system. So I said, I can't do that role unless I learn the language. And that was one that didn't have all the Arabic influence, even though when you're in the cities, people speak Chinglish, which is half English more than anything else. But when you go to the rural settings, you can actually get a little bit better, you know, as far as that goes. And then this is the main thing, and it goes back to the Arabic influence, that when I went to grad school, I wanted to learn isiZulu. And my ideal was I wanted to learn the language of every single people who've whooped white people's behinds. So I knew that the Asante had wars against the Anglo-Asante wars. I said, all right, I need to learn their language because at least they've whooped some white folks' behinds. I learned about the Battle of Isamwana, where the Zulu whooped that white behind. So I said, I need to learn the language of every single people who've whooped that white behind and compile that together. Now we're going to get somewhere. But Zulu wasn't being taught, so that left me with Yoruba, because that was the other options were Hausa, Kiswahili, and Sudanese Arabic. I said all of those are either straight Arabic or got Arabic in it. So that took me to the Yoruba as something that was more authentically African, and then started studying Wolof, which has so much, you know, the Arabic in it, you know, French in it, so forth and so on. But I would say, in short, I think I've kind of gone long, but in short, that it's really up to what are your goals. I think at that point in time, I was looking for the core of the African worldview. And I came to understand that the way to get to that is through African languages. I was listening to a talk from Baba Khalid Muhammad at my parents' bookstore, the Bayyinah Cultural Center. And I was like, how come anytime we're speaking about African liberation, we do it in these white languages? That seemed like such a contradiction. So, you know, I said the best way to critique is by doing something different, as opposed to, well, they don't speak it. All right, well, if I think that's a problem, then I need to actually step up and do it. So if your goal is to, you know, have a trade language, then that may point you towards Kiswahili. If your goal is to, you know, repatriate, then learn the language of that. So really the objective will determine what language is best for you more than anything else.
Thank you, brother. Also, real quick, make sure you tune in tomorrow. We will have the fireside chat with Dr. Asante and Brother Omawale Africa. That'll be at 3 p.m. also live to our YouTube channel. The link is in the chat, so make sure you go and register for that as well. I think I'm gonna go ahead and just ask this last question. Considering the topic of discussion, you know, the anatomy of a renaissance amidst a global shift, I think I would be remiss if we don't mention, you know, about COVID. I know it was touched upon for a second. Recently, Time wrote an article, and it was called "The Coronavirus in the U.S. is a Failure of Democracy." How can we take advantage of the economic shift that's going on due to the pandemic? Dr. Mazama had to actually come off for travel. So Professor Bello or Dr. Ọbádélé?
Right, in terms of taking advantage, well, Mama Bayyinah, did you want to speak to that?
No, I didn't hear clearly the question I was asking. Yeah.
Wahida, you have to unmute. You're muted.
Oh, my apologies. The Time recently wrote an article. It was called "The Coronavirus Crisis in the U.S. is a Failure of Democracy." The question is, how can we take advantage of the current climate of change amidst this coronavirus pandemic?
I'm not so sure you want to hear what I think.
Absolutely.
We absolutely want to hear it now.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. First of all, I do not believe that there is any surprise or anything that happened that people did not know, that there was no plans and all this other stuff. I just don't. So whatever it is that is going on, I don't know what it is, but I know that the sickness is just the cover up for what's going on. So therefore, I think our people should be extremely careful. We are in a very, very dangerous time, but at the same time, dangerous times are the best times for bringing new ideas, new thoughts, new whatever you want to do. So if you don't get into the game of, the disease and all of that, I mean, that's the charade. If you don't get into all of it and you take your time and plan and plot, then when things open up, you will be in a good position. Do not wait to look for things as you know them. Surprise is the worst element in any war. The one thing you don't want to happen to you is to be surprised. Be ready for anything, whatever it may be. Imagine whatever you want to imagine, but most of all, plan, plot what you want to get out of whatever comes in. This is a very good time for doing a lot of things, creating what was not there before. Don't come out with a mindset of, I gotta get my old job and I gotta, no, please, 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 no. Imagine what you can do. Everything is possible in times of great danger.
Dr. Ọbádélé.
Yeah, so one thing that I had considered for quite some time, recently one of my students was, he pointed out a documentary to me called Cold Case Hammersjold. I'm not sure if any of you have seen that, but at the end of the documentary, they discuss SIMAR, which is a South African Maritime Research Institute. And basically what that is one, they claimed credit, at least the one who's being interviewed claimed credit for killing the Secretary General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld, as an organization. But the thing that's relevant to us is that they talked about the HIV clinics that they set up in the townships of South Africa, and that they did so in order to claim to treat, health challenges or whatever. But what they were actually doing, and this is a verbal confession, is that they were injecting people with HIV. And they said, the thought in the early 90s was that HIV was a killer. So the best way to get an all-white South Africa is inject all the Black people with it, so you're treating them. So they had, these white doctors who would go there and intentionally do this. Another thesis, Chandra Gold has a thesis on Project Coast, also out of South Africa. And what this is again, they tested anthrax and other things. There's this Wouter Bassoon, also known as Dr. Death, who was trying to find a virus or anything that would specifically, exclusively kill Black people. And the Project Coast of it is that they would take these anti-apartheid activists, arrest them, test on them, and then when they died, they would take a helicopter and drop their bodies into the ocean. We know about Tuskegee, we can go on and on, but essentially what I'm saying is that, biological and chemical warfare is something that I think for us as Black people, we can start thinking about what makes Eurasians Eurasians. We can look at SLC24A5, the specific gene that makes whites white. We can look at OCA2, which is the gene for the light skin that you find in East Asians, so-called Eurasians, and then also Western Eurasians as well. We can look at these things and then even see that, sometimes we focus on, well, what if we had these types of guns or these types of missiles and these types of whatever, and I won't go very far into what I mean, but I'll let you read between the lines, that we can see that without those missiles or whatever, that entire economies are collapsing, countries are shutting down, that I think in that we can even see perhaps a means of resolving our problems in the world. And that is to say that intentional or not, those who have power will always bend whatever to their advantage. So if it's an intentional thing, I've seen people say that. If it's an unintentional thing, I've seen people say that. But regardless, if you are in power, you will say, perfect. Whatever happens, just like Mama Bayyinah said, it's like never be surprised. Oh, great, somebody bombed these towers, let's go into Iraq. Somebody didn't bomb these towers, okay, great, let's go into Iraq. Whatever it is, it's like, you know, this is perfect. And I think that if we are ready and we are prepared, then whatever happens, we'll say, great, this is perfect. The borders are shut down, the economies are collapsed, perfect. This means that we continue on with our plan.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so that'll wrap up the Q&A. I just want a couple quick announcements. Again, make sure you tune in tomorrow. For AI Week 2020, we will be having our African children's storytelling at 12 o'clock. That'll be live on our YouTube page. Then we will follow up at 3 p.m. with reimagining a movement toward a united Africa at 3 o'clock. That'll be on YouTube. Make sure you register for that. The link is in the chat. And then we will wrap up with an African Liberation Day watch party on Monday. Don't forget to also like, retweet, share, subscribe to our channels. I would like to thank the panel once again. We're very grateful that you guys came together. We'd love to see you back again. We hope that you guys stay safe and that you take good care of yourselves and your family, that you are well. Asante Sana for joining us. Thank you to the audience, everybody who is following along and supporting AI. At this time, I'm going to go ahead. If there's nothing else, I want to ask the Shinudi to wrap up with a closing prayer for us.
Asante Sana, Sister Wahida, Tata, Umwali, and especially the guest, Tristan, sorry too. Let me, allow me, I'm going to ask the Reverend my elder to close this in prayer. Thank you. I'm going to ask the ancestor again. I'm going to thank them for their presence during this this meeting that we had. We learned so much. I want to continue to ask them to protect us, to give us good health, security, to our family, to our friends, and anyone out there who is fighting for the liberation of African people worldwide, to continue to protect our organization as well as sister organization. Unity is our aim, victory is our destiny. Ashe. All right, thank you again. Back to you, Wahida.
Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Thank you for that, Shinudi. Everyone else, just continue to follow AI. We do have some more events for AI Week. And again, also check out Dr. Asante with the MKA Institute, the lecture series. He'll be speaking at 4 p.m. On, again, United Africa. This will be available on YouTube for you if you want to watch the replay. And if you have anything you need to contact us about, you can hit us up at victory@aiphilly.org. Thanks so much for tuning in. Peace. Hotep. Okay, Brother Omawala, you can end the live stream and I'm going to hang out on the Zoom for a few more minutes.